Hello, everyone. I'm Jeff Greenawalt. I hope you enjoy watching and listening to this video I created about the life and art of Stephen Collins Foster. And when my friends at the Adams County Historical Society asked me to create this video, I agreed right away since, of course, I really support the Adams County Historical Society, and it's that organization that preserves the stories I use on my living history walking tours. Well, let's talk about Stephen Foster. He entered the world in Lawrenceville, Pennsylvania, out near Pittsburgh, a town along the Allegheny River. And he made his arrival on the 4th of July of 1826. Pretty interesting that day because two American icons passed away that day. Both John Adams and Thomas Jefferson died on the day this future American icon was born. Stephen's parents were William Barclay Foster and Eliza Cleland Tomlinson. They married right up the road here in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania in 1807. And his parents took him to Trinity Episcopal Church in Pittsburgh, where he received baptism April 27, 1827. Now, Stephen had a number of siblings. Charlotte Susanna, she was born in 1809. Eliza, born in 1812. Henry Baldwin, born in 1816. Henrietta Angelica, born in 1818, Dunning McNair, born in 1821, and Morrison, born in 1803. Family also had a son named James Cleland in 1829, but unfortunately he only lived about a year. And there was one other son who played a significant role in Stephen's life. Like his father, he bore the name of William, though members of his family simply referred to him as Brother William, and he was the son of a relationship that his father had prior to getting married to Stephen Foster's mother. And apparently, whoever this mother of the child was thought that she couldn't support the child, so she left him on the Foster doorstep in 1815. Stephen and his older half-brother William did not grow up together. In fact, William left the Foster home prior to Stephen's birth to pursue working as a surveyor for the Erie Canal. But this older half-brother saw something special in Stephen's personality, and as I'll tell you in a few minutes, he periodically intervened to help and support Stephen. Well, the Foster family was initially very, very well off. Pittsburgh was the center of extremely successful business ventures in the early 1900s, and the city produced iron, glass, steam engines, steamboats. There was so much industry in Pittsburgh, and I'm not sure this is a good thing, but by about 1819, the entire city was covered in coal dust. And Stephen's father did very well in steamboat shipping and a number of other successful enterprises. He enjoyed traveling in the elite business circles in the city, and he also served in the State House of Representatives in Harrisburg. But shortly after Stephen's birth, well, things went south. An economic downturn impacted many of the businesses in Pittsburgh, including the Foster business, and that caused the Bank of Pittsburgh to foreclose on the Foster house, and they had to move out in 1827. Stephen's father tried to rebound, but he lost a considerable sum of money investing in a turnpike project. And then he tried working with canals, and I suppose he must have collected some tolls because apparently he had a problem separating public and private money, and that cost him that job before long. And it was about this time that Stephen's father acquired a drinking problem. Though, for a while, it looked like Stephen's family might establish a tradition of great musicians. His sister, Charlotte Susanna Foster, who was born in 1809, was a child prodigy. And by the time she was a teenager, she was pretty polished and studying with a tutor, and her talent showed most brightly in her love and abilities in music. And Charlotte eventually studied at St. Joseph Academy in Emmitsburg, Maryland, and there she demonstrated considerable musical talent. Unfortunately, by the time she returned to Pittsburgh, the Foster family couldn't even afford a piano. So she went to Louisville, Kentucky to visit cousins and stayed there for quite a while, enjoying music, and she took lessons on the harp. And there she met a young man named Atkinson Rowan, who fell in love with her. And while she liked him, she said she just couldn't imagine spending the rest of her life with him. She returned to Pittsburgh briefly due to fear of spreading illness in the South, but went back to Louisville in 1829. And that year, what they called bilious fever, which was probably malaria, came into the household where she was staying. And it took Charlotte Susanna's life. And at her side when she died was Atkinson Rowan. And Charlotte Susanna was probably the Susanna in Foster's song, "Oh Susanna." You know, when Stephen Foster entered the world, it was a time of great change in American popular music. Because before 1831, there really was no American popular music because there were no copyright laws that covered music. So why would composers write new songs when they could freely copy British music, which was apparently a fairly common practice? So you couldn't make any money. In fact, there were very few songs written in America before 1815, and really it didn't take off until these copyright changes came along. However, pianos were being manufactured in Pittsburgh, and that started about 1813, so that led to an increase in interest in music and popular songs. In addition to that, technical advances, including steam-powered presses, decreased the cost of printing music and made it possible for publishers to print great numbers of music sheets at less expense. And this technology was a major step in allowing songwriters to earn a living from their craft. Still, most music was purchased by women. I found that interesting. The prevailing thought at the time was that men outgrew music, so I guess I'm kind of immature since I love music. I'm not sure what contributed to that thought, since music was important to both genders in a number of historical periods before that I've looked at. So if you have a thought on what caused that cultural phenomenon, please put it in the comments that go with this video. And in addition, performers and composers were not considered particularly reputable. Most songs in the early 19th century were published in songsters, which were books containing lyrics but no tunes. And I found that kind of interesting. That was a tradition that came from what was referred to in early periods as broadsides, which were large sheets of paper where a song was printed but no tune. Of course, popular and folk song tunes were frequently recycled and used with many new lyrics, so you could put something like "to the tune of." But by the time of the rise of original music during Stephen's lifetime, I would imagine these songsters fizzled out pretty quickly and were replaced by sheet music that had the tunes. Stephen demonstrated an interest in music when still a child. He could whistle "Old Lang Syne" by the time he was about 6 years old. And he learned to play the flageolet, which is, that's a woodwind instrument that looks a little like a recorder. He also began picking out tunes on his sister's guitar. And then he met a man named William Peters, who was teaching music to his sisters. And Stephen took advantage of that and gave him an early start. And by the way, speaking of sisters, Stephen's sister Eliza married Reverend Edgar Buchanan, the brother of the future president, in 1833. In 1837, Stephen's father presented him with his first songster. It was pretty full of what we would consider very racist material today, but, well, it was unfortunately a pretty racist period in America during the time, and those songs were very popular. Now, Stephen began his musical career as sort of an amateur, performing crude comic songs in what people thought was African American dialect. Now, even though Stephen came from the first state to pass a law phasing out slavery in 1780, of course that was Pennsylvania, his family did not support equal rights for African Americans. In fact, in 1838, his father supported a bill denying African Americans the right to vote in Pennsylvania. Well, about that time, though, Stephen came under the influence of his uncle, John Struthers, who he absolutely adored. Struthers was pretty elderly by this time that Stephen came under his influence, but when he was younger, he was a frontiersman, so he was full of great stories. He also expressed the opinion that Stephen would grow up to be a great man. Well, Stephen's half-brother William, as I mentioned earlier, must have seen something special in Stephen, and since he was doing well financially, he wanted Stephen to move in with him so that he could provide Stephen with a good education. Well, of course, Stephen's parents jumped at that chance since they didn't have the money to give Stephen any kind of education. So when Stephen was 13 years old, he moved in with brother William. He expressed great distaste for rote learning and memorization. He was fond of reading. And so when he became literate, he read a lot on his own and actually became fairly well educated for his day. And he also began to study music seriously under the guidance of a German immigrant named Henry Kleber. Kleber gained a reputation in Pittsburgh as a performer, music merchant, composer, and music teacher, and Kleber probably represented the best opportunity Stephen had to learn as much as he could about music. Well, while Stephen was living with his half-brother William, his parents needed a place to live, and William was kind enough to allow them to move in as well. And Stephen did eventually enroll in Jefferson College, but he only lasted a few months and then he dropped out. He just had no interest in joining the members of his family who were trying to get back into being upwardly mobile. During his teenage years, Stephen and his brother Morrison, along with his close friend Charles Sheares, formed a club called the Knights of the Square Table that met twice weekly at his home. And these young men engaged in singing, and Stephen acted first as a song leader and then a composer, and these activities led to Stephen copywriting his first song in 1844. The song was titled "Open Thy Lattice, Love," and Stephen opened his career as a composer with this song at the age of 18. "Open Thy Lattice, Love" is a parlor song. It's based on a poem by George P. Morse, and Foster set the lines of that poem to music. He dedicated the song to Susan Pentland, who was one of his neighbors. And it is a bright song with a kind of catchy bounce. So I hope you enjoy my rendition of this song.
Open thy lattice, love, listen to me. The cool, balmy breeze is abroad on the sea. The moon, like a queen, roams her realms of blue, and the stars keep their vigils in heaven for you. Ere morn's gushing light tips the hills with its ray, away cross the waters, away and away. Then open thy lattice, love, listen to me, while the moon's in the sky and the breeze on the sea.
As the United States struggled with the issue of slavery, Stephen Foster didn't take a strong stand. He disapproved of abolitionists, though he never tried to defend slavery. He became what was referred to as a dough-faced Democrat. The term referred to anyone willing to do whatever was necessary to preserve the Union, and he shared that attitude with his brother-in-law, President James Buchanan. However, he never really got involved in the issues since he was much more interested in music than politics. Stephen became very assiduous in his process for composing songs. He kept a thick sketchbook where he wrote down draft ideas for song lyrics as well as for melodies, and he studied different music and poetic styles among the many immigrants coming into the United States in order to compose what he thought of as the people's music. He was very careful to craft his songs precisely, just as he envisioned them, frequently laboring over very small details. Consequently, he demonstrated formidable skill as a composer of popular songs. By 1847, Stephen Foster crossed over to the dark side. He published his first minstrel song, Louisiana Belle. He followed that up very quickly with another minstrel song about a week later. These and many of his other minstrel tunes appear to be very racist to us today. However, one should consider that he treated the subjects of his songs with more compassion than other minstrel writers of his day, and he did not trivialize the hardships of slavery. In fact, he attempted to humanize the characters in his song. He attempted to address themes that were common to all people, and he also According, at least, to some of the sources I read, he would instruct white singers who performed his songs not to mock the slaves. He stated that he wanted to make his songs appeal to refined people by not using the trashy and really offensive words of some minstrel tunes. And perhaps that view on the subject was being impacted by his friend and collaborator, Charles Shears. Shears was a diehard abolitionist. He even became a leader in the movement and published an abolitionist newspaper. He also did help Stephen write at least one song, and that song is now lost. Prior to becoming a full-time composer, Stephen only circulated his songs informally. He gave copies to friends. Toward the end of 1846, Stephen moved to Cincinnati to work as a bookkeeper for his brother Dunning. He rented a room at a local boarding house in Cincinnati, which proved to be more ethnically diverse than Pittsburgh. So, Stephen frequently heard African American music in that city, and that probably impacted some of his compositions. Well, when the Mexican-American War broke out, Stephen's brother Dunning went off to serve in the Army. And for that reason, Stephen supported the war. In fact, his first instrumental composition was called Santa Anna's Retreat from Buena Vista. Well, while living in Chicago, Stephen composed what was to become one of his greatest hits, Oh, Susanna. Back in Pittsburgh, Stephen's brother Morrison had submitted one of his songs into a song contest at the Eagle Ice Cream Parlor. Well, the song didn't win, but it made the folks at the parlor aware of Stephen's music. So, on September 11th, 1847, performers at the Eagle Ice Cream Salon performed Oh, Susanna publicly for the first time, and the song was a major hit. So much so that folks today consider the date to be the birthday of popular hit songs in America. Oh, Susanna is probably the first distinctly American song, although it does utilize a polka rhythm, which was, of course, popular in Europe at the time. It is also likely that his reference to seeing Susanna coming over the hill was a reference to seeing his deceased sister, Charlotte Susanna.
Well, I come from Alabama with a banjo on my knee, and I'm on Louisiana now, my true love for to see. Well, it rained so hard the day I left, the weather it was dry. The sun so hot I froze to death, Susanna, don't you cry. Oh, Susanna, now don't you cry for me. Well, I come from Alabama with a banjo on my knee. Oh, Susanna, now don't you cry for me. I'm from Alabama with a banjo on my knee.
Well, Stephen received a payment of $100 for Oh, Susanna. However, its popularity convinced his publisher to award him a royalty of a grand sum of 2 cents for each copy of this sheet music sold. And it doesn't sound like a lot today, but it was enough to convince Foster to become a full-time composer. As 1850 began, Stephen quit his day job to write and sell music full-time. He moved back to his half-brother's house in Pittsburgh, where his parents were still living. And Stephen published Nellie Was a Lady. The song was a considerable departure from the usual minstrel tune. It creates the impression that Stephen was indeed trying to boost the nature of his minstrel songs. The song takes the form of a parlor song and not the usual bawdy and racist minstrel tune. And the narrator of the song is sympathetic, expressing the grief of losing a loved one, someone everyone living in the 19th century could understand very well. In addition, Nellie is African American, but is referred to in the song as a lady, and that's a term that was usually reserved for high-class white women. So here's the first verse of Nellie Was a Lady.
Down on the Mississippi floating, long time I traveled on the way. All night the cottonwood a-toting, sing of my true was a lady, last night she died. Toll the bell for lovely Nell, my dark Virginia bride.
Now, about this time, Stephen met Jane Denny McDowell. He pursued a romance with her, and it was his one and only romance. Jane was the daughter of a Pittsburgh physician, and she was a pretty young woman with beautiful auburn hair. She rejected the advances of at least one suitor to go with Stephen, and I have to admit, I don't really understand why she did that because, well, there's no indication that Jane had any real fondness for music, and in addition, it appears that Stephen showed no signs of affection that would generally be exhibited by husbands. But despite this, they were married after a very rapid courtship on July 22nd of 1850. And there must have been at least some affection, since Jane delivered a baby girl 9 months after their marriage, and they named their baby girl Marion. Well, perhaps the birth of Marion kept Jane and Stephen together and gave them some joy. However, Jane probably wasn't very happy in the marriage. Well, bringing his wife to live with him in the same household as his mother certainly didn't help, and Jane may have found herself competing with Eliza Foster for Stephen's affection. In addition, Stephen was very difficult when composing his music. He generally sequestered himself alone while composing and became very detached from his wife during these periods. About the time that Stephen met Jane, he published one of his greatest hits, Camptown Races. Christie's minstrels introduced the song to the American public, and the inspiration for the song came from the racetrack in Camptown, Pennsylvania. The Camptown ladies were probably prostitutes that frequented the racetrack, and doodah was probably the call used by these prostitutes to solicit business.
Well, Camptown ladies sing this song, doodah, doodah. Camptown racetrack 5 miles long, oh, the doodah day. Well, I come down here with my hat caved in, doodah, doodah. I go back home with a pocket full of tin, oh, the doodah day. Gonna run all night, gonna run all day. I bet my money on a bobtail nag, somebody bet on the bay.
Well, shortly after publishing Camptown Races, Foster published a few more minstrel tunes, and then he turned away from minstrel tunes to concentrate more on parlor songs. His switch to parlor songs corresponds with the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, so, well, I wonder, could this heinous law be responsible for maybe making Stephen feel guilty about minstrel songs? I suppose it's possible. Parlor songs were considered more genteel than minstrel songs, and also more feminine. And of course, part of this was probably because, as I mentioned earlier, most sheet music was purchased by women. And interestingly enough, most of Foster's parlor songs don't portray virtue, but mainly portray innocence. Now, believe it or not, a few of Foster's parlor songs are at least somewhat cheerful. However, the macabre tone of many of his songs were due to this period's obsession with death and a fondness for Edgar Allan Poe's poetry. But this switch to parlor songs didn't last, because minstrel tunes were much more popular, and the switch to parlor tunes was negatively affecting Foster's income. And he had a family to feed, so he decided to return to minstrel tunes. The return to minstrel music led to one of his greatest hits. E.P. Christie of Christie's Minstrels commissioned the song Old Folks at Home. He published the song in 1851, but E.P. Christie appeared as a composer on the sheet music, and it was many years before Stephen Foster's name appeared as the composer. And Stephen didn't make much money on this song despite its popularity. He did receive some royalties, but not greatly the reward expected, given the success of this song and its popularity. And by the way, a little bit of trivia. Stephen's brother Morrison, while looking at a map of Florida, was the one who came up with the name of the Swanee River, which kind of fit the tune that Stephen was in the process of composing. Well, Foster tried hard to capitalize on the success of Old Folks at Home by writing similar tunes, and one of those was Masses in the Cold, Cold Ground. The song is probably more about the death of Stephen's own father. Well, he decided to take a vacation from songwriting in 1852, and one part of his vacation was a trip down the Mississippi River, and well, that was one of the few times that Stephen Foster was actually in the South, in spite of writing so many songs about the South. This time, Stephen showed that he was no abolitionist. He wrote a campaign song for William Bigler, who was a candidate running for governor of Pennsylvania. And Bigler won largely because his opponent opposed slavery and the Fugitive Slave Act. The Christiana riots, an incident in which a slave catcher lost his life trying to arrest an escaped slave, occurred just before the elections, and it scared many Pennsylvanians. So they voted for Bigler. Soon after these events, Harriet Beecher Stowe published Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now, first, Foster had no interest in reading the novel because not only did it condemn slavery, but it also condemned minstrel tunes, which were his principal source of income. Eventually, Foster started to see the commonality between the characters in his novel and his own experience, and he began sympathizing with the characters in Uncle Tom's Cabin so much that his song, My Old Kentucky Home Good Night, was originally titled Poor Uncle Tom Good Night. Foster believed he could not come out publicly against slavery because he depended heavily on Southerners to buy the music for his song. Well, eventually, Uncle Tom's Cabin became a stage play, and the producers of the play used Foster's song, but he didn't receive a penny for the use of his music. In the spring of 1853, Jane had enough. When Stephen left Pittsburgh headed for New York, she took Marion to Lewistown, Pennsylvania, to her mother's home. That year, Foster published a song called Old Dog Tray, and in the song, Old Dog Tray shows his loyalty and how he would never leave Stephen Foster like Jane did. In June of 1854, Foster published I Dream of Jeannie with the Light Brown Hair. A lovely song, but Jeannie is no doubt a version of Jenny, a nickname for his wife. And in the song, he dreams of Jeannie, longs for Jeannie, sighs for Jeannie. The song implies, though, a permanent separation. In fact, the original version of the song before it was published had Jeannie dying.
I dream of Jeannie with the light brown hair, born like a vapor on the summer air. I see her tripping where the bright streams play, happy as the daisies that dance on her way.
Many were the wild notes her merry voice would pour. Many were the blithe birds that warbled them o'er. Oh, I dream of Jeannie with the light brown hair, floating like a vapor on the soft summer air.
Also in 1854, Firth and Pond, Stephen's publishers, published a collection of music intended to appeal to lovers of operatic and classical music, and that included, in the collection, several instrumental versions of Stephen Foster's songs, and he even contributed a number of these. Well, as far as his marriage, perhaps all was not lost. Stephen and Jane reconciled in 1854. But despite this, problems continued. Jane was not reconciled to his insistence on a career that did not provide sufficient support for his family. And she could also not abide his increasing dependence on alcohol. Now, several sources I consulted disagree on how long this reconciliation lasted, and they were trying to judge it largely from the letters that went back and forth. But one thing they do agree on, that it didn't last very long, maybe a year or two. And Stephen's fortunes continued to decline, and his drinking continued to increase. And so the following year of 1855 saw him publish only 4 songs. Now, Jane did not live full-time with Stephen during the last years of his life, but she must have had some affection left for him, for she visited him frequently and would stay for short periods of time, trying to support him as best she could. In 1856, Stephen published Gentle Annie. The song took advantage of the popularity of Irish and Scottish ballads, and his publisher took advantage of the release of that tune to publicize 2 volumes of songs. Unfortunately, although those volumes of songs sold extremely well, Stephen did not receive a penny for their sales because he had already sold the copyrights to these songs. Well, Stephen returned to politics that year, probably not with very good judgment, in my opinion, at least as we view it today. He began to beat the drum for the Democratic Party as a supporter of James Buchanan, largely because of Buchanan's promise to return to the past, and Stephen longed for Pittsburgh to return to what it once was. He became director of the Allegheny Buchanan Glee Club in order to support Buchanan's candidacy. You have to understand, though, that glee clubs at the time didn't just sing. They often caused riots as well by attacking their opponents' supporters. Foster wrote several campaign songs for Buchanan and disparaged the Republican Party, John Fremont, and the abolitionist policies of the Republican Party. In spite of this, he did express relief when the election was over and he was done with politics. Foster published his first song in almost a year in 1859. That song was Fairy Belle, and it's largely forgotten today. In an effort to recapture the success he had with Oh Susanna, Foster published The Glendy Burke in 1860, songs about a steamboat named after a mayor of New Orleans. The irony to all this is that by the time Foster published the song, the real Glendy Burke was wrecked. Stephen was becoming more and more desperate for money, so he published about a dozen songs in 1860, but these were not his best work. 4 of the parlor ballads are absolutely morose. Another problem Stephen found, having campaigned for Buchanan, was that by this time people absolutely detested Buchanan. He was called everything from Benedict Arnold to an old cowardly imbecile. And Stephen Foster's sister and her husband, brother of the president, found their house stoned and their children were jeered on their way to school. Well, as the Civil War approached, Stephen Foster did not exactly rally round the flag. In fact, he had a relationship with Fernando Wood, the mayor of New York City, who supported secession and shipped weapons to states that would soon become part of the Confederacy. Foster managed to publish several more minstrel tunes. Most of them are understandably forgotten. Well, Stephen's half-brother William passed away in 1860. He'd been a financial success, becoming vice president of the Pennsylvania Railroad. And of course, he was a source of support for Stephen Foster, so his death deprived Stephen of a much-needed friend. Foster did publish a song called "I'll Be a Soldier," but the song viewed the possibility of war as very remote, and unfortunately for Stephen, the Battle of First Manassas took place shortly after he published the song. Obviously, that song was not a hit. He did get aboard the Union bandwagon when on July 12th of 1862, Abraham Lincoln called for 300,000 volunteers to put down the rebellion. A poet named James Sloan Gibbon wrote a poem titled "We Are Coming, Father Abram," and he published that in the New York Evening Post. And several composers wrote tunes for the poem, and Stephen's is probably the best, at least it's certainly my favorite. He respectfully dedicated his version to the President of the United States. And Foster's version of the song is undoubtedly the one most remembered today, and it's been a fixture of my Civil War song repertoire for many years. So here's my version of at least the first verse of "We Are Coming, Father Abram."
We are coming, Father Abram, 300,000 more, from Mississippi's winding streams and from New England's shore. We leave our homes and workshops, our wives and children dear, with hearts too full of utterance, with but a silent tear. We dare not look behind us, but steadfastly before. We are coming, Father Abraham, 300,000 more. We're coming, our union to restore. We are coming, Father Abraham, 300,000 more.
Foster then published another song called "We've a Million in the Field." Now, many composers of popular songs like George F. Root were making a fortune writing war songs, but this one by Stephen Foster was a flop. Foster didn't update his musical style, nor did he get into the martial spirit of the war. The song was clearly outdated, using the style of his writings from the 1840s and 50s. In addition, his psychological condition continued to deteriorate. He published several forgettable songs in 1862. However, during this period, he wrote what is my favorite of his parlor songs called "Why No One to Love." I think this is a lovely tune, so I'll include it here. If you have an opinion about this song, please express it in the comments.
No one to love in this beautiful world, full of warm hearts and bright beaming eyes. Where is the lone heart that nothing can find, that is lovely beneath the blue skies? No one to love, no one to love. Why no one to love? What have you done in this beautiful world that you're sighing of no one to love?
Stephen Foster's fortunes were going from bad to worse. He managed to publish 49 songs in 1863, a huge quantity, but they're mostly of terrible quality and completely forgotten today. He was living in the back room of a bar and sleeping in a rundown hotel in the Bowery. And then he turned his attention to hymns, not because he had some kind of religious awakening. In fact, he was very indifferent to religion, but he did find a publisher looking for hymns. and he had about as much fervor for religion as he had for sobriety. Foster entertained at sobriety meetings, but never took the pledge. He met a man named George Cooper when Cooper approached him about setting a poem he had written to music. They had some success with the song when they shared it with one of the people from Bryant's Minstrels. And following that mild success, Cooper became sort of an apprentice to Stephen Foster, but Stephen was too far gone. Cooper probably did more to support him than to be an apprentice. Cooper was a member of a New York regiment, and this led Stephen to compose a number of now forgotten war songs, and they included an extremely racist song about a soldier in one of the regiments of the United States colored troops. Stephen and George Foster also attempted to earn some money writing theatrical music. Their success was somewhat limited, for sure. And finally, on January 9th, 1864, Stephen Foster fell in his hotel room and cut his throat. The doctor came to his aid and stitched the throat. Eventually, the doctor took Stephen Foster to Bellevue Hospital, but he died there on January 13th. I've read opinions that Foster fell because he was drunk, and other opinions say that he was ill and probably delirious, feverish, and so forth. At any rate, when he died, Jane, his wife, and his brother Morrison traveled to New York to claim the body. Jane was already working as a telegraph operator, so she could have some income to support herself and the daughter she had with Stephen. Eventually, she did marry again to a man named Matthew Wiley, who was a railroad baggage and express agent. Jane died in 1903 due to burn injuries she suffered when her clothing caught fire as she sat near the hearth in her home. Some of the historians I read speculate that Stephen Foster was probably about a decade too soon to try to make a living with American popular song. Despite his shaky apprentice with Stephen, though, George Cooper went on to make a very good living writing popular songs. Stephen's brother Morrison took care of Stephen's estate, and he collected royalties and other fees due to Stephen on behalf of Jane and Marion. Morrison even wrote a biography of his brother, one that I've read, and I agree that the biography tended to whitewash Stephen's life. In the book, Morrison claimed that part of Stephen's problem was always being indifferent to money and fame. Morrison, by the way, lived until 1904. I'll close with this song that Foster's publisher claimed was the last one he wrote shortly before dying. There exists some question about this statement. Foster may have written the song as early as 1862 and prepared it for publishing. However, it didn't reach the public until after his death. It's also one of my favorites, Beautiful Dreamer.
Beautiful dreamer, wake unto me. Starlight and dewdrops are waiting for thee. Sounds of a rude world heard in the day, lulled by the moonlight, have all passed away. Beautiful dreamer, queen of my song, list while I woo thee with soft melody. Gone are the cares of life's busy throng. Beautiful dreamer, wake unto me. Beautiful dreamer, awake unto me.
Well, in conclusion, I don't think of Stephen Foster as a trailblazer in reducing racism in America, that's for sure. Although I will say that I found one source that claimed that Frederick Douglass said that Stephen Foster's songs helped to create sympathy for African Americans. He was, however, definitely a trailblazer in promoting American popular song. So when you listen to Taylor Swift, keep in mind that although he never experienced anything close to her financial success, he was the very first to try to make a living at the same trade that made her very successful. Thanks very much for watching, and please take care.